When we think of WWF versus WCW and New York versus Atlanta, we usually think of the Monday Night Wars, especially those who watch my channel on a regular basis. The WCW Nitro versus WWF Raw Monday Night TV ratings war would make professional wrestling explode in popularity during the mid to late 90s as these two rival promotions went all out to give fans their very best wrestling shows. Cutthroat tactics to secure viewership didn't start with the Raw vs Nitro TV war though, and the WWE nowadays would like you to believe that WCW going up against the WWF with their Nitro show broke some sort of unwritten rule where promoters shouldn't compete against each other and, quote, steal away viewership. Vince McMahon, however, done pretty much the same thing back in 1987 when Jim Crockett Promotions, the crown jewel of the National Wrestling Alliance, announced they were going to go on pay-per-view for the very first time with Starrcade 87. For a fee, wrestling fans could avoid going to closed-circuit venues and they'd be able to watch Ric Flair try to reclaim the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against Ron Garvin in the main event. And they could also see the Rock and Roll Express take on the Midnight Express in a scaffold match, or a Skywalker's match as it were. WrestleMania III happened earlier in the year, and Vince McMahon's huge show in the Pontiac Silverdome generated an estimated $10.3 million in pay-per-view sales alone, and when you consider that WrestleMania 3 ticket sales brought in an estimated $1.6 million, you come to the obvious conclusion that pay-per-view television was where the big money was being made, and this is where wrestling was headed. Crockett wanted a piece of that pie. The Starrcade 86 VHS tape had ended up being the best-selling wrestling video to date for Turner Home Entertainment. There was clearly a demand for big wrestling shows that people could watch in the comfort of their own home instead of visiting closed-circuit venues. And so after seeing the success of WrestleMania 3, it just made sense for Jim Crockett Promotions to try out the pay-per-view formula. Vince McMahon, however, was determined to crush Starrcade 87 before it even began. Vince McMahon's answer to Starrcade 87 was to create another pay-per-view that would run on the exact same night as the NWA's biggest show of the year. What's more, Vince McMahon wasn't just happy to put on a show and test the loyalty of wrestling fans around the world. Oh no, Vince McMahon contacted cable companies and he issued a threat. They either carry the WWF pay-per-view or they carry the NWA's Starrcade. Any cable company who decided to carry Starrcade would not be allowed to broadcast WrestleMania IV, which was already promising to be seriously lucrative if it was anything like WrestleMania III. The show Vince created to go head-to-head with Starrcade was the Survivor Series, and the first ever Survivor Series would air on Thanksgiving night and feature a new concept, a series of elimination tag matches which would notably go on longer than your standard WWF matches at the time. Worried about the potential loss in revenue for not carrying the big 1988 WrestleMania show, the vast majority of these cable companies agreed to not show Starrcade. It was a dirty move from Vince McMahon and it paid off. Many fans who wanted to watch the NWA Supercard at home were simply not given the chance to do so, but if they wanted, they could certainly pay to watch Vince McMahon's wrestling show. JCP tried to find an alternative to keep everyone happy, such as moving Starrcade to an earlier evening show so both pay-per-views wouldn't go head-to-head, but it didn't work in the end. Only 4 cable companies carried Starrcade 87, 3 of which were based in the Carolinas, a far cry from being the NWA's big debut pay-per-view that would be available in all homes across America. Needless to say, Survivor Series 1987 turned out to be more successful. Just to clear it up also, this doesn't necessarily mean that one company was producing better wrestling shows than the other. Many will say the World Wrestling Federation was still promoting better events regardless of Vince McMahon's pay-per-view tactics. Many will also say the Crockett syndicated shows were pretty awful at the time, and they only resonated with a certain group of fans anyway. But that's not really what we're here to talk about today. okay? I just wanted to highlight what the pay-per-view landscape was like at the time. So, for example, the Bunkhouse Stampede, Crockett's next pay-per-view in January of '88 that was carried by a lot more cable companies, was heavily criticised for its poor booking and the fact that the start time was incorrectly printed on the tickets, meaning a lot of fans missed the first half of the show. Plus, the show was held in New York, an obviously deliberate move that failed to pay off. McMahon, though, was still pulling dirty moves. The first ever Royal Rumble in 1988 was placed on the USA Network for free the same night as the Bunkhouse Stampede pay-per-view. So even with all the problems the event already had, McMahon was still doing everything he could to take away viewership. Jim Crockett, Booker, Dusty Rhodes and even Ted Turner all fought back, and they done so in the most spectacular way possible and in a way that Vince McMahon couldn't tamper with. WrestleMania IV, being held in Atlantic City, was scheduled to take place on the 27th of March 1988. Putting a NWA Supercard pay-per-view against WrestleMania wasn't going to work for a number of reasons, and so JCP simply done what the WWF did back in January. That's right, a big, free NWA show would go head-to-head with a WWF pay-per-view, and fans who didn't want to pay for WrestleMania could still get their wrestling fix. It was a good move from JCP and the NWA, and there was nothing the WWF could do about it, seeing as the show would be airing on Ted Turner's own network. The show would be named Clash of the Champions. It would take place in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the show would be headlined by the Nature Boy Ric Flair doing battle with a young superstar who'd been getting quite a lot of crowd support as of late, the man called Sting. What's more, this plan worked. While WrestleMania IV is fondly remembered as the night Randy Savage became the WWF champion, the rest of the show was seriously below average, and in comparison, many fans consider the first Clash of the Champions show as one of the absolute best shows in WCW history. It sure didn't fix JCP's financial problems, but the night of March 27th, 1988 could very well be seen as a resounding victory for the NWA over the WWF, thanks to the in-ring action that took place. Not only did fans get to see Sting try to win the NWA Heavyweight Championship, but they also saw Mike Rotunda versus Jimmy Garvin, the Midnight Express taking on the Fantastics, which many people believe was the match of the night. It's a seriously action-packed 10 minutes that's 100% worth your time. There was also the Road Warriors and Dusty Rhodes taking on the Powers of Pain and Ivan Koloff in a barbed wire match. And in the semi-main spot, Lex Luger and Barry Windham were going to try to win the NWA Tag Team Championships from Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. The first Clash show was already excellent in comparison to WrestleMania IV, even before the main event took place. And when Sting and Flair did eventually lock horns in the Greensboro Coliseum, the two men created wrestling history, and Sting's career would get pushed to the next level. Magnum TA was in position to become the NWA's next big babyface superstar, and those plans would lead to Magnum and Flair headlining shows for the NWA Championship. It's widely believed that Magnum was going to become the NWA Heavyweight Champion, but after his tragic car accident, the NWA had to rethink for the future. The National Wrestling Alliance searched for their next big good guy, and while Nikita Koloff turning babyface sure did get a great crowd reaction in the wake of Magnum's accident, he never did win the NWA Championship. Ronnie Garvin, however, would win the NWA title in September of '87, but the ramifications of this title victory were colossal. It's pretty clear that Garvin only won the belt so he could drop it back to Flair at Starrcade '87, giving the NWA show a big title win when it went up against the Survivor Series. But in those 2 months that Ronnie held the title, JCP viewership and ticket sales plummeted. Garvin as NWA champion was seen as a huge misstep. You can see that the intentions were right with having Flair win the title back, but those 2 months were very costly to JCP and the NWA. And so the search for Flair's next opponent continued. I'll just quickly mention too that Ronnie Garvin reportedly agreed to become the champion, even though he fully understood he was dropping it back to Flair. Garvin felt that this was his last chance to hold the NWA title, and so he took it. Sting became a part of Jim Crockett Promotions when Bill Watts sold the UWF to JCP. Guys who joined Sting in travelling to Crockett Promotions included the fabulous Freebirds, Shane Douglas, Eddie Gilbert and Steve Williams. And even though Sting spent some time working as a heel, and even though he was still pretty new to the business, Dusty Rhodes saw something special in Steve Borden. Steve had been getting some great ovations from younger fans during his early days in JCP. The face paint, his charisma, his ability to fire up an audience during his matches, the fact that he looked like an action figure come to life. Sting really did have it all, and of all the talent JCP gained from the UWF acquisition, it was quickly realised that Sting had the most future potential. Show after show, the Stinger would get bigger and better crowd reactions, and Booker Dusty Rhodes decided to give Sting a real make or break moment. Even though Sting was unproven in the ring, Dusty decided to throw Sting into a main event match with Ric Flair, the NWA champion. This is noteworthy too because not many UWF guys would receive big pushes in JCP, especially someone as young and unproven as Sting. So it's a pretty big deal that Sting would main event this show in an NWA heavyweight title match. Not only would this match main event the Clash of the Champions show that was going head to head with WrestleMania, but this was also going to be a 45-minute bout. Ric Flair could go over 45 minutes if needed, it was kinda his thing. But could this 29-year-old relative newcomer with only 3 years experience possibly pull it off? Needless to say, the pressure was on. We can now look back and say, yeah, it all worked out fine, but you have to appreciate the risk factor here too, especially after the ill-received Bunkhouse Stampede show, and the fact that Sting vs Flair was going up against WrestleMania IV and the big title tournament. Clash of the Champions 1 admittedly looks pretty awful nowadays when you watch it back. The broadcast quality is pretty bad in comparison to the WWF shows from the same era. There isn't a big elaborate entranceway set up and the arena isn't glowing with a multitude of lights and whatnot. If you're looking for glitz and glamour, then WrestleMania IV would have been the show for you. But again, it's all part of the gamble. The NWA's biggest weapon against the WWF was the in-ring abilities of their superstars, and fans of the National Wrestling Alliance and Crockett Promotions mostly didn't care for the over-the-top style of the World Wrestling Federation anyway. So just keep that in mind when you go back and watch shows from this era. As previously mentioned, the matches that took place before Flair vs Sting ranged from good to excellent. The Midnight vs the Fantastic shouldn't be skipped when you watch this show, but let's take a look at Flair vs Sting to see if Steve Borden made the best out of his big opportunity. Spoiler alert, he absolutely did. Sting says that his match with Ric Flair at Clash of the Champions was the most pivotal match of his entire career, and it's the match that truly put Sting on the map. There had to be a winner in the Clash of the Champions main event, and should the match go the distance, a panel of judges would decide the victor. We have NWA board member Gary Juster, former NWA wrestler Sandy Scott, the 1988 Penthouse Pet of the Year Paddy Mullen, and actors Jason Hervey and Ken Osmond. Sting comes out first to a great ovation wearing black, red and blue face paint, and then Flair comes to the ring with JJ Dillon. Dillon is going to get locked in a shark cage during this match to ensure there's no interference, and the crowd pops huge when Dillon gets suspended inside his own personal jail cell. Something I want to point out also is the fact that the audience had been extremely loud during this entire Clash show, and throughout this entire main event, they didn't let up for a single moment. This is one of the loudest crowds you'll ever hear at a wrestling show, and if you like loud pops, then Clash 1 is the show for you. We get our introductions, the bell rings, and our match is underway. Flair starts off with some styling and profiling, but Sting is able to bring Flair to the corner. The Stinger shouts out to the audience, and again the crowd is totally pumped up. Flair grabs Sting by the hair and he slams him to the mat. Sting performs a kip up, and this instantly makes Flair back up. It's a great little reaction from the Nature Boy here. Sting then powers out of a top wrist lock, a very simple thing on paper, but because both men took their time, it's a small spot that gets another thunderous ovation. Flair and Sting then take some time to build anticipation. Both men walk around the ring staring at each other, and Sting challenges the Nature Boy to a test of strength. Flair again takes his time accepting the challenge as the Nature Boy has the crowd in the palm of his hands. The two men lock hands and Flair screams in pain as Sting once again overpowers his opponent. Flair brings Sting to the corner for a hard chop, but it has no effect. Sting hits a hip toss followed by a dropkick, and the Nature Boy goes outside of the ring to rethink his strategy. Flair applies a hammerlock, but it quickly gets countered. The judges look on as Flair forces a break at the ropes. An Irish whip sequence sees Sting perform 2 drop downs and 2 leapfrogs before Slick Rick takes a press slam. A flying head scissors, a hip toss and a headlock takedown follows as the announcers let us know that 40 minutes still remain in this matchup. Flair breaks the headlock, but Sting comes back with a standing headlock. Flair tries to answer with a hip toss, but Sting replies with a hip toss of his own before going for the side headlock again. It's all Sting so far, and Flair has been very giving. JJ Dillon tries to coach Flair from the shark cage, but it's no use. Sting continues to overpower and outsmart the champ, and the crowd absolutely loves it. Flair tries another corner breakup and he tries another knife edge chop. Once again, Sting no-sells it. And then Sting teases a few punches in the corner, but he thinks better of it. He's going to save that for a little later. Flair tries to take advantage of Sting's hesitation, but the champ takes another hip toss and another dropkick. We see the Flair flop, and fans are starting to think that Sting could actually win this thing. Another fantastic spot happens when Flair throws Sting out of the ring, but the challenger jumps right back in. Flair then begins to panic as Sting begins approaching the Nature Boy. Again, it's a small spot. On paper it sounds like nothing, but it's insane how effective it is. We then get the punches in the corner that were teased earlier, and Flair gets brought down again with a side headlock. The NWA champion tries a few pin attempts while still locked in, but Sting rolls out. We see another break at the ropes, but this time Flair is able to capitalise. Stinger takes a little punishment once again in the corner, but Sting fires up and Flair takes another press slam. Rick begs for mercy after taking the bump, but Sting wants to punish Flair with a bear hug. Flair ends up being held in the bear hug for a few minutes. It sounds dreadfully long, but Flair's selling of the move is so good that you don't realise how long it's been locked in for. Sting brings it down to the mat and Flair screams and shouts that his back is in immense pain, but Sting doesn't care. The Stinger beats his chest after delivering a big right hand, and Flair can do nothing but cower away in the corner. The Nature Boy gets launched into the opposite corner and Sting tries a jumping forearm, but Flair moves out of the way. Sting still fights back and he goes for those punches in the corner again, but Rick answers with an inverted atomic drop, finally pulling off a move that floors Sting. Rick brings it to the outside and Sting gets thrown into the guardrails not once but twice, and now, finally, it looks like Slick Rick is going to take control of this match. Sting takes a few more chops and he crumbles to the mat when Flair whips him in the corner. Flair does it one more time and he kicks Sting when he's down, and you've got fans in the audience who just can't help but cheer for the Nature Boy. 2 signature knee drops from the champ gets followed up with Flair showing why he's the dirtiest player in the game. Flair claws at Sting's face before bringing more punishment in the corner. Sting's hopes of becoming the NWA champion are slowly slipping away. Sting gets thrown back out of the ring, and again Sting gets thrown into the guardrail. The audience make the Greensboro Coliseum rumble when Flair gets back inside the ropes. Sting follows and the Nature Boy delivers more punishment. But then, it looks like Sting is going to make a comeback. The chops begin having no effect on the challenger and the crowd goes nuts. Honestly, the reaction here when Sting knocks Flair over the top rope is absolutely incredible. The Stinger goes for a jumping clothesline, but he wraps his arm around the ring post. The exciting comeback is put on the back burner as Flair again goes in control, and already at this point they could have went home and it would have been a great match. Flair bends the Stinger's wrist, Sting comes back with another kip up after getting brought down to the mat, punches in the corner from Sting get followed up with a clothesline, and Sting takes a little time to keep the audience pumped up. A standing vertical suplex from Sting gets followed up with a scorpion deathlock, but Flair gets under the ropes. This gives the audience hope that Flair really could lose the championship in this very match. Every time Flair hits a chop and Sting no-sells it, the reactions get louder and louder. Yet anytime Sting tries to end the match, Flair finds a way to stay in the game. Sting finds himself getting dropped across the top rope, but it does no damage. Sting goes straight up the turnbuckles and a crossbody gets delivered, again only a 2 count. Too much confidence leads to Sting taking a knee breaker, and you know what this means. Flair is going to start softening up the leg. Another knee breaker leads to Sting falling out of the ring, and now Sting is starting to hobble around on one leg. Back inside the ropes, Flair begins stalking Sting while still targeting the leg. A back suplex puts Sting down to the mat, and Flair locks in the figure 4. This surely has to be the end of the match. Ric Flair is going to do it again, and he's leaving the first Clash show still the NWA champion. JJ cheers Flair on as the Nature Boy uses the ropes to his advantage. The Stinger is in an immense amount of pain here, but then somehow Sting begins moving Flair away from the ropes. While in the figure 4, Sting begins screaming and beating his chest, and this spot right here would become a staple in subsequent Flair vs Sting matches. Sting reverses the pressure and the hold eventually gets broken. Both men now have an injured limb, but this doesn't stop Flair going straight back on the attack, again softening up Sting's leg. Flair tries to suplex Sting out of the ring, but Sting counters it, and then when Sting goes for a grounded splash, Flair gets the knees up. It's now anyone's guess who's going to win this thing. An abdominal stretch makes Flair scream in pain as it's announced that we only have 10 minutes remaining. Flair manages to get Sting on the mat and the Nature Boy goes to the top rope. Sting wakes up and Flair goes flying across the ring. Sting crotches Rick on the ring post, and then Sting has a chance to apply another Scorpion Deathlock, but instead he locks in a figure 4. Flair gets to the ropes and Sting again takes time to shout out to the audience. More punishment from the Stinger results in Flair again begging for mercy, but now Sting is going to start softening up the Nature Boy's leg. Flair gets a little heated and he pushes referee Tommy Young. Young pushes Flair right back, and this gets another great pop. We see the Flair turnbuckle bump and the Nature Boy takes an absolute beating on the outside. When both men eventually get back inside the ropes, it's announced that we only have 5 minutes remaining. Flair tries a sunset flip into the ring, but Sting is having none of it. Flair's head gets raked against the top rope, and Sting is now firmly in control. An inverted atomic drop has no effect on Sting. Sting hits a clothesline, but it only gets him a 2 count. Sting then sets up Flair for a Stinger splash, but the champion moves out of the way. Sting tumbles out of the ring as the fans once again make the arena rumble. Back inside the ropes, Flair locks in a sleeper, but Sting launches his opponent into the top turnbuckle. Sting then gets thrown out of the ring, but he comes back in with a sunset flip. Flair tries to use the ropes for a cheap pin, but Tommy Young puts a stop to that. After going up and over the turnbuckle, Flair actually jumps off the opposite top rope, but Sting rolls through into another pin attempt. It's close, but it's only 2. And then it happens, the moment everyone remembers from this match. so good. There's only 1 minute left. Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone have to scream into their headsets as the crowd is now at a fever pitch. Sting hits the Stinger Splash, and then, with 30 seconds left, Sting locks in the Scorpion Deathlock. The crowd is screaming for Flair to give up, but Flair holds on. The match is ended in a time limit draw. So, the judges will decide who leaves Clash of the Champions as the NWA Heavyweight Champion. It was an incredible matchup here, and no matter who won, Sting was now a made man. Paddy Mullen scores the match for Flair. Gary Juster scores the match for Sting. Sandy Scott scored it as a draw, and for whatever reason, the other judges don't have a say in this, so the match is ruled as a draw. Sting can't believe it. Flair also seems shocked that he's leaving the ring still holding the belt. But yeah, what an absolute classic professional wrestling match. It builds and builds until the final moments of the bout, and you honestly forget that it's 45 minutes long. The time flies in because it's just so fun to watch. The decision to air Clash of the Champions against WrestleMania IV worked. On the grand scheme of things though, Crockett Promotions couldn't keep going on in this manner. Saturday night's main event, for example, still drew a ridiculously high number on NBC in comparison to the Clash shows on TBS. A real lack of substantial revenue married with a high amount of overspending, moving shows to the Chicago and New York areas, a series of poor booking decisions, no national domination in comparison to the WWF, all of this would see JCP on the verge of bankruptcy. Not wanting to lose wrestling on his television network, Ted Turner purchased a majority interest in the promotion later in 1988, while the Crockett family maintained a minority interest. Turner would purchase JCP through a subsidiary known as the Universal Wrestling Corporation, and ultimately Jim Crockett Promotions would get renamed to World Championship Wrestling. As we all know, the Atlanta versus New York wrestling rivalry would continue, picking up an insane amount of momentum when Eric Bischoff introduced WCW Monday Nitro to wrestling audiences. Again, the WWE narrative on their documentaries and whatnot, and what Vince McMahon says, they'd be happy for many fans to believe that Nitro was simply created to hurt the WWF, and in a way it was, but when you look at McMahon's track record with Crockett Promotions in the late 80s, well, many would see the debut of Nitro as a case of turnabout being fair play. Needless to say, if you haven't saw Sting vs Flair at the first Clash of the Champions show, then you simply need to check it out. Anyway, thank you for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it and take care.